So as I'm sure you are all aware by now, we had our first major free agency domino fall for players who have player options on the final year of their contracts anyway, and that was Fred VanVleet, who has declined his player option of near $22 million to become an unrestricted free agent this offseason, which is pretty significant. It's not surprising, which I'll explain why, but it is significant. I mean, even though VanVleet had somewhat of a down year and the Raptors struggled overall as a team, he's still a great player, one of the better point guards in the league, and was an all-star last season, so naturally it's going to create some news and buzz around the NBA. And of course, whether this is a new free agent on the market or a new player to be had on the trading block, Bulls fans go crazy saying, hey, maybe we should go after this guy. Well, since the news broke, I've had a lot of you asking me my thoughts on VanVleet. Should we go after him? Can we get him? And while I know it's another pessimistic outlook video, the answer is no, and it's for a number of reasons which I'll explain. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, there are a few things you have to understand about the Bulls salary cap situation going into the offseason, which we've talked about before, but simply put, the Bulls do not have any salary cap space to sign any free agents this summer aside from the mid-level exception, which they can use to sign one or multiple players up to $12.2 million, which was raised under the new CBA, as well as the biannual exception of a little over $4 million. That's it. The Bulls are already operating as an over-the-cap team. That includes even if they let Vucevic walk in free agency, as even with his salary gone, they would still be over the cap. It's not like they magically get $22 million in cap space on their payroll from what Vuce was making last season, which I've said before is why you're most likely going to be seeing Vuce in a Bulls uniform next season, because if they let him walk, they really don't have the ability to sign another center at the same caliber to replace him. I also made a video on that as well, so I won't belabor the point here. But the point is, the Bulls do not have the requisite cap space to sign Fred VanVleet because, well, yes, the Bulls have the ability to use the mid-level exception. We all know VanVleet is going to be looking for more money than just $12.2 million a year. The reason he declined his player option of $22 million is because he thinks he can get more than that. Otherwise, he would have just exercised his option. It's not like VanVleet declined his option because he wants out of Toronto and is willing to take less. No, he knows he's a starting level guard in his prime, and with the salary cap rising, he knows he can get more than $22 million. Now, whether he's worth more than that is a separate issue, but the fact of the matter is VanVleet is looking for a big payday. You're talking about a guy who was undrafted, had to spend a number of years in the G League to work his way into the NBA, and then finally earn an NBA contract, albeit a small contract. Signs his first big payday with the Raptors in 2020, and this is potentially, this upcoming one anyway, is his last chance at a big long-term deal, given he's going to be 30 years old next season. Thus, the Bulls signing VanVleet as a free agent is out. Not going to happen. The only way the Bulls would be able to bring in VanVleet is in a sign-and trade. In other words, the Bulls agree to terms on a deal with Fred as well as the Raptors to sign him and then trade him to the Bulls to enable the Bulls to bring him in while remaining over the cap and owning his bird rights. But here's the thing. If you're going to execute a sign-and trade for VanVleet, who are you trading to the Raptors to bring in Fred VanVleet at presumably a pretty sizable salary? I'm sure Fred is looking for a contract in the range of $25 to $30 million. The only players on the Bulls that make that kind of money or more are DeMar DeRozan and Zach Lavine. And while sure, maybe a straight swap of DeRozan for VanVleet would be decent, although I still think if you're going to trade DeMar, you can get more for him, or at least try to get some younger players or draft capital in return. But VanVleet, great player, starting point guard, can also play the two, but Bulls need a point guard, an actual viable point guard who can facilitate and manage the offense. But while a sign and trade like that is decent for the Bulls, doesn't make sense for the Raptors. Don't get me wrong, a return to Toronto for DeMar would make for a great story, and I think the city would welcome him with open arms. And DeMar can still ball. Let's not kid ourselves. It's not like the dude is washed. But does DeMar DeRozan make sense for the Raptors if in fact they're looking to make changes to get younger and build more for the future after having a disappointing season last year? And taking on DeMar on an expiring contract, really as a one-year rental. I don't know, I have a hard time seeing them agreeing to it. I guess it would be better than just losing VanVleet for nothing as a free agent, but you would have to think they would be looking for other avenues in a sign and trade on the roster. And I mean, if we're talking about moving Zach Lavine in a sign and trade for VanVleet, forget about it. That's just not worth it at all. Whether you like Zach or not, he's worth more than that, even if you wanted to actually move him in a trade. Unless, of course, the Raptors threw in more pieces in the trade, say a couple of draft picks or even OG Anunoby, but I can't see them doing that. It's just not realistic. And yes, Sure, there is a world where you could execute a double sign-and trade with Nikola Vucevic, which the Bulls would probably have to add in another piece's salary filler, given Vuce is expected to get around $20 million and VanVleet somewhere in the range of 25, but the Raptors aren't going to want to do that. Not when they have too many bigs as it is, and again, the age factor, after having an underwhelming season, the last thing they're going to want to do is bring in veterans who are past their primes. I've seen some people say, well, what about Lonzo Ball? What about including him in a sign and trade for VanVleet along with other pieces? Like, really? Lonzo? There's a very high likelihood the dude never plays basketball again. Has no trade value whatsoever, and you think the Raptors would be interested in moving VanVleet for him? Like, come on now. I know as Bulls fans, sometimes we have lofty delusions of what we want for this team, but you also have to be realistic. And the reality is, there aren't a lot of avenues for the Bulls to sign Fred VanVleet. They can't sign him outright as a free agent, that's out. There's no going around it. And then as far as a sign and trade, the Bulls have little trade assets to work with to execute a sign and trade deal where it would make sense for all parties involved. You can't just think how it benefits the Bulls, but what is the other team also getting out of it as well? Like I said before, VanVleet is a great player, a true undrafted success story, has really upped his playmaking in recent years, great scorer as well, and I do think he would be a nice fit on the Bulls and what they're needing for that starting point guard spot. But it's just not practical, and I would even wager to say there is less than a 1% chance the Bulls will be adding VanVleet to the roster. Those are just my thoughts though. I would love to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.